Hi, class, and welcome to chapter 4, which will be on living tissues. We'll start with part A. So this chapter just has two parts to it, part A and B, and I'm going to try to get them both done in one recording because they're both a little small or a little shorter, and they should be a really good review from your histology portion of anatomy. So we're going to be talking about tissues, the living fabric. Individual body cells are specialized to form tissues, and each type will perform a specific function that maintains homeostasis. And tissues are just groups of cells similar in structure that perform common or related functions. Histology, as you know from anatomy, is specifically the study of tissues. And the four basic tissue types that you covered in anatomy, most likely, hopefully you remember a little bit of them, are epithelial tissues, which cover things, connective tissue support. That includes all your bones, cartilage, blood, muscle tissue, move things throughout the body of three types of muscle tissue, and then nervous tissue controls everything. So in your brain and spinal cord. So here's a look at overview of the basic tissue types and where you can find these four basic tissue types in the body. Feel free to pause this lecture video here to review this slide. This is a great slide to review where all of these tissue types are located throughout the body. Microscopy of human tissue. To be viewed under a microscope, the tissue must be fixed or preserved in a solvent, sectioned or cut into slices thin enough to transmit light or electrons, and then stained to enhance the contrast, although artifacts or distortions will detract from what the sample looks like. Light microscopy uses colored dyes, and electron microscopy uses heavy metal coatings. So here's a look at transmission and scanning electron micrographs. So the transmission electron micrograph is on the left, and the scanning electron micrograph is on the right. They both kind of beam electrons through the tissue sample, but the scanning electron micrograph gives you a more of a 3D image. This is cilia shown here. And then the transmission electron micrograph gives you a 2D image. So epithelial tissues, these are sheets of cells that covers body surfaces or cavities. They can cover and line epithelial on the external and internal surfaces like skin. And we have glandular epithelium, which is the secretory tissue and glands. And the main functions, again, in epithelial tissue are the protection, absorption, filtration, excretion, secretion, and sensory reception. Epithelial tissue has these 5 distinguishing characteristics that I'll let you review on your own, and we'll go through each one kind of quickly here. Polarity just means that there's a top and bottom to epithelial tissue, where the apical surface is the free or exposed size, and the basal surface faces inward toward the body and attaches to the basal lamina, which is like an adhesive sheet that holds the basal surface of the epithelial cells to the underlying cells. So here's a look at an example of epithelium, with the apical surface being a border to the open space and the basal surface being next to the underlying connective tissue. There's specialized contacts where these epithelial tissues, they need to be closely fit together. So they have lateral contacts between cells that include tight junctions and desmosomes. Supported by connective tissues, all epithelial sheets are supported usually underneath by connective tissue, whether it's the reticular lamina or the basement membrane. Cancerous epithelial cells are not contained by the basement membrane boundary like other cells. They actually will penetrate and invade their underlying tissue, which will result in the spread of cancer. Epithelial tissue is avascular, meaning that no blood vessels are found in epithelial tissue. They are nourished by diffusion of blood vessels from underlying connective tissues, and they're supported by nerve fibers. So they are nervous. They can take or receive nerve stimuli. Regeneration, epithelial cells have a high regenerative capacity. And this is usually stimulated by their loss of the apical or exposed cells that are exposed to either an external or an internal surface. So they must be replaced constantly. They're usually exposed to friction or other hostile substances, which result in damage. so they have the ability to regenerate and replace themselves. Epithelial tissues have two names based on the number of cell layers. Simple epithelia are single layer thick, as you remember. Stratified epithelia are two or more layers thick. And their second name indicates the shape of their cells. So squamous is flat, cuboidal is box-like, and columnar is tall or column-shaped. In stratified epithelial of more than one layer, the shape can vary in each layer. So we always name the epithelium for the cell that is closest to the apical or exposed layer. So here is a simple squamous epithelium with flat shaped cells. And here's a stratified squamous epithelium, even though there's cuboidal shaped cells toward the basement or basal layer surface, we always name the epithelial by what the shape of their cells are at the apical surface. So this is stratified squamous. Here's again a look at the shape of epithelial cells, squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. You can see kind of a flat nucleus in squamous, a circular nucleus in cuboidal, and then an oval shaped nucleus that kind of tends to be at the bottom of the cell in columnar. Simple epithelium are important for absorption, secretion, or filtration. So we'll find them in the kidney and lungs where rapid diffusion is a priority. There's two special simple squamous epithelia that are based on locations. The endothelium lines lymphatic vessels, blood vessels in the heart, and the mesothelium is the serous membrane in the ventral body cavity. So here's a look at simple squamous. Again, it's very thin, so it allows for rapid diffusion of materials growing directly through it, such as in the lungs, where carbon dioxide and oxygen are exchanged. Simple cuboidal is a single layer of cells that are cuboidal in shape. It functions in secretion and absorption. So we'll find these in the ducts of glands and many kidney tubules. Here's simple cuboidal. And then here's a look at simple cuboidal, kind of a cross-section view. You can see how their simple cuboidal cells are surrounding what we call a lumen, or a hollow space in between. Simple columnar, a single layer of tall, closely packed cells. Some can be ciliated to help move mucus around. So we can find these in the digestive tract, your gallbladder, ducts of some glands, the bronchi, and uterine tubes. And here we have simple columnar, and this is non-ciliated. So you see microvilli, but we don't see cilia. We do see goblet cells, which will secrete mucus. Pseudostratified columnar. Pseudo means false. So it looks like it could be stratified, but it's actually still a single layer, simple epithelium. Many cells will be ciliated. They're involved in secretion, particularly of mucus, and also in the movement of mucus via the ciliary sweeping action. They're located in the upper respiratory tract, the ducts of large glands, and tubules of testes. And here's a great look at pseudostratified ciliated columnar lining the human trachea. Here's the cilia, which will be involved in the movement of mucus. So it'll trap anything harmful that you could be breathing in and then pass it along. Here are the goblet cells containing the mucus that will be secreted. And then you see the pseudostratified. It looks like there's several layers of cells, but you'll eventually see how there's one nucleus for each cell and it all attaches to the basement membrane. Stratified epithelial tissues involve two or more layers. New cells regenerate from below. Stratified squamous are the most widespread of stratified epithelia. The free surface is squamous. They're located in areas of high wear and tear, like the skin. Keratinized cells are found in the skin, and non-keratinized cells are found in moist or wet linings. So here's a look at stratified squamous epithelium lining the esophagus. And it will be non-keratinized because its apical cells are still alive and leading to the kind of the moist or wet environment, and they're not filled with keratin. Stratified cuboidal is rare, found in some sweat and mammary glands. Stratified columnar is also limited in male urethra, some in pharynx, and lining of some glandular ducts. The transitional epithelium forms a lining of hollow urinary organs, and it's found in your bladder, ureters, and urethra. The basal cells are cuboidal, but has the ability of these cells to change shape when stretched, which allows for increased flow of urine, and in the case of the bladder, more storage space. I sometimes think transitional epithelium looks like balloons. A gland is one or more cells that makes and secretes an aqueous fluid called a secretion, and they're classified either endocrine or exocrine. The endocrine glands are internally secreting. So, their example, they secrete hormones, and they secrete their hormones directly into the blood. And exocrine glands are externally secreting. So, they use ducts to secrete their products. An example of this is sweat. There's a relative number of cells forming the gland, either unicellular, like goblet cells, or multicellular, such as salivary glands. So here's a look at different types of glands: multicellular epithelial glands, exocrine glands, and then endocrine glands. You can see secrete their substances directly into the bloodstream, whereas exocrine glands will secrete their substances through a duct to the exterior surface. Endocrine glands are ductless. They secrete hormones by exocytosis, and these hormones are messenger chemicals that travel through lymph and blood to their target organs, and we'll talk a lot more about hormones. Exocrine glands secretions are released onto body surfaces like skin or into body cavities. They're much more numerous. They secrete mucus, sweat, oil, salivary glands. They can be unicellular or multicellular. Unicellular exocrine glands are your mucus cells and goblet cells. They secrete the mucin, which is like a slimy, protective, lubricative coating or mucus. And here's a look at the goblet cell, the unicellular exocrine gland that will secrete the mucin or mucus. Multicellular exocrine glands are composed of a duct and a secretory unit. They're classified by their structure and the mode of secretion. Their structure can be simple or compound. In a tubular gland, the secretory cells form a duct, whereas in an alveolar gland, the secretory cells form sacs. I won't ask you too many questions about details about these glands, but this just gives you a look at the different types of multicellular exocrine glands. You have a lot of different types depending on where they're located throughout the body. The mode of secretion in your multicellular exocrine glands can be merocrine, where that's like the sweat and pancreas; holocrine, which are sebaceous oil glands that accumulate products within and then rupture; and then apocrine glands accumulate products within, but only the apex ruptures. So here's just an example of a merocrine gland secreting their products by exocytosis. And then in holocrine glands, the entire secretory cell ruptures, releasing secretions and dead cell fragments. So let's move on here to part B, which is a little longer. And again, I'm going through this a little bit quicker because I'm hoping this is kind of a review. We'll go through connective tissue, which is the most abundant and widely distributed. You have connective tissue proper, cartilage, bone, and blood. Basically, connective tissue serves as kind of the catch-all: binding, support, protecting, insulating, and transporting substances like the blood. So I'm going to encourage you guys to pause slides here. Connective tissue proper, we're going to go through the subclasses relatively quickly, the cells and the matrix included, and the features. Cartilage, the three types of cartilage, and then the components and features. Bone, blood, again, cells, matrix, and general features. If you guys study these two slides, that's probably going to be pretty close as much as you need to know about connective tissue. I won't ask you too many other details besides what's not on these two slides of all the classes and subclasses of connective tissue. So three characteristics make connective tissues different from other primary cells. All have a common embryonic origin. So they all arise from what we call the mesenchyme tissue as their tissue of origin. So during embryonic development in the womb, they all come from the same type of tissue. They have a varying degree of vascularity. So for example, cartilage is avascular, no blood vessels, and bone is highly vascularized, meaning there's lots of blood vessels going through it. Cells are suspended or embedded in what we call the extracellular matrix, which is like a protein sugar mesh. And this matrix will help support the cells so they can bear weight, withstand tension, and endure abuse. All connective tissues have these three main elements: ground substance, different types of fibers, and cells. The ground substance is the gel-like material. It's made of interstitial fluids, cell adhesion proteins, proteoglycans, and water. The connective tissue fibers can be collagen, elastic fibers, or reticular. Collagen are the strongest and most abundant. Elastic fibers allow for stretch, and reticular fibers are highly branched, and their branching forms networks that offer a little more give to them. You can have blast cells in connective tissue. Fibroblasts are found in the connective tissue proper, chondroblasts found in cartilage, and osteoblasts found in bone. These blast cells are just immature cells that form that actively secrete ground substance and the extracellular matrix fibers. And then you have the site cells, which are mature, less active, that now become part of and help maintain the health of the matrix. You have fat cells, which store nutrients. White blood cells respond to injury and defense. Mast cells initiate an inflammatory response against anything foreign. Macrophages are phagocytic cells that eat dead cells, microorganisms, and they function in the immune system. So this is another good review slide of looking at all the different types of fibers, what exactly is ground substance, and the different cells that you could find in connective tissue and different types of connective tissue. Here are the four main classes of connective tissue. And this is a great kind of chart. This is where we're kind of going as we quickly review these. The connective tissue proper can be loose connective tissues or dense connective tissues. The loose are areolar, adipose, reticular, and the dense can be dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. Areolar is the most widely distributed. It supports and binds other tissues. It's kind of the universal packing material between other tissues. It contains fibroblasts, loose fibers, ground substance, macrophages, and fat cells. Here's a great picture of what connective tissue proper looks like, the loose areolar. Adipose tissue is white fat. The cells are adipocytes, which contain the fat. It functions in storing nutrients, shock absorption, insulation, and energy storage. Here's a look at adipose tissue. It looks like these adipocytes are completely empty because they're clear, but they're actually filled with fat droplets because fat stains clear. Reticular connective tissue resembles areolar tissue, but the fibers are thinner. Reticular fibers form a mesh-like stroma that acts as a support for blood cells in the lymph nodes, your spleen, and the bone marrow. So here we have the branching reticular fibers in reticular tissue. Then we have dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. Dense regular has a high tensile strength with tightly packed bundles of collagen fibers that run parallel to each other. It has fibroblasts and very few cells and ground substance. Mostly it's just made of fibers. So you'll see dense regular connective tissue looks like a very kind of tight bundles of collagen stacked right on top of each other, running parallel, and very few cells in dense regular. Makes up your ligaments and tendons, so it provides highly tensile strength. Dense irregular connective tissue has the same elements as dense regular, but the bundles are thicker and more irregularly arranged. It resists tensions in many directions, so you'll find it in the dermis layer of your skin, fibrous joint capsules, and some of the fibrous coverings of some organs. So here's your dense regular connective tissue. Again, few cells, lots of bundles of collagen fibers, but they're arranged in every which direction. Elastic connective tissue is found in the walls of many large arteries. The arteries need to stretch when blood enters and recoil to push blood out. So you'll see elastic connective tissue. Again, it's a type of dense connective tissue. And the best way I can describe elastic connective tissue is the elastic fibers that make it up look like kind of like lasagna, layers of lasagna underneath a microscope. Cartilage will have chondrocytes as adults and chondroblasts during growth. The chondrocytes are found in cavities or spaces called lacunae. Cartilage is avascular. There's different types of cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is shiny. Elastic cartilage is similar, but with more elastic fibers. And fibrocartilage kind of has properties between hyaline and dense regular. So here's a look at hyaline cartilage. Very few fibers, not any fibers are seen, but you can see the chondrocyte, the cartilage cell in the lacuna space. Again, it's found at the ends of your long bones, costal cartilage, the cartilage of your nose, the trachea, and their larynx. Elastic cartilage is found in the external ear and the epiglottis. And in elastic cartilage, you'll see more elastic fibers. You'll still see the chondrocytes in the lacuna. And then here we have fibrocartilage. It has tensile strength that allows it to absorb shock compression found in your intervertebral discs and the pubic symphysis. Avascular cartilage loses the ability to divide as we age, so injuries will heal slowly. And cartilage injuries are very common in people with sports injuries. Later in life, the cartilage can calcify or become bony, causing the chondrocytes to die. Bone then is called osseous tissue. It supports and protects your body structures. The bone cells are called osteocytes, and they reside in cavities called the lacunae. An osteon is the individual structural unit in the bone, and bone is richly vascularized with lots of blood. And here's a look at bone. It kind of looks like the rings on a tree if you were to cut a tree in a cross section, and you can see the osteocytes are the little black circles kind of sitting in the lacuna spaces. Blood then is the most atypical, so really different connective tissue because it's a fluid. It consists of cells surrounded by the matrix. Red blood cells are the most common type. Also contains white blood cells and platelets and fibers that precipitate during blood clotting. And your blood functions in the transport and carrying of nutrients, wastes, gases, and other substances. Here are your red blood cells seen with no nucleus, and anything that stains darker purple is a type of white blood cell. And you might see small little platelets. They're not shown in this picture. In the plasma will just be the space around the cells. Then we get to muscle tissue, highly vascularized. It's responsible for most types of movement. Muscle cells possess myofilaments that are actin and myosin. We're going to talk about how they work to contract your muscles later on. There's 3 types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal is voluntary because you consciously control it. Cells are called muscle fibers that contain multiple nuclei, and they appear striated or banded. And skeletal muscle attaches to and causes movement of bones. So here's a look at skeletal muscle. Multinucleated fibers pushed off to the periphery. Then you can see the striations or the banding of voluntary movement. Cardiac muscle is only found in the walls of the heart. It's involuntary, meaning your heart beats on its own. It contains striations, but the cells have only one nucleus. The cells have many branches that join together to other cardiac cells are intercalated discs, which are specialized joints where cardiac cells are joined. So you see striations, but only one nuclei per cell, and then the intercalated discs will connect the branching cells together. Smooth muscle is also involuntary. It's found mainly in the walls of hollow organs. It does not have striations, and it has spindle-shaped cells with one nucleus. So one nucleus and spindle-shaped cells, meaning they're kind of thicker in the middle and they're tapered at the end. Involuntary, found in your stomach, intestines, uterus. The nervous system is the main component, or nervous tissue is the main component of the nervous system, your brain, spinal cord, and nerves, which will regulate and control all your body functions. It's made up of neurons and supporting cells. And here's a look at nervous tissue. Here are the neurons, and then around them are all the nuclei of different supporting cells. The supporting cells are much smaller. We call them glial cells, but the neurons are what you can kind of see here, the nucleus, cell body, and then dendrites and axons. Covering and lining membranes, so they're composed of at least 2 primary tissue types: epithelium bound to connective tissue below it. And you have 3 types of covering and lining membranes: cutaneous, mucous, and serous. Cutaneous is just another name for skin. It contains the keratinized stratified squamous layer and then the dermis layer underneath it. Skin is a dry membrane. So that's kind of our first cutaneous membrane. Mucous membranes, mucosa indicates location, not cell composition. They're also called the mucosae, and they will line body cavities that are open to the exterior, like your digestive, respiratory, and urogenital tracts. Most of these membranes are bathed by secretions or urine, and they may secrete mucus. And this is a look at where some of your mucous membranes are located. And then serous membranes are found in closed ventral body cavities. You have a parietal serosea that lines internal body cavity walls. And then the visceral serosea is what covers your internal organs. The cavity between these two layers is filled with slippery serous fluid. So these are very moist membranes. And there's special serous membranes are given to show their location. So pleurae have to do with the lungs, pericardium have to do with the heart, and peritoneum has to do with the abdomen. And this is where you can see your different serous membranes, whether they're around the lungs, the heart, or the abdomen. Tissue repair. So when your body barriers are compromised, the inflammatory and immune responses are activated. Repair starts very quickly. Repair is the function of the inflammatory process, and repair can occur through regeneration or fibrosis. So regeneration is when the original function is restored and the tissues are replaced. Fibrosis is when the original function is lost and the connective tissue replaces destroyed tissue kind of as a scar tissue. Step one, I'm going to let you guys read through these steps in tissue repair on your own. I don't think I ask you too many questions about skin wound regeneration and fibrosis, but you should know about it. Step two, organization restores blood supply. Step three, regeneration and fibrosis affect the permanent repair. So talking about scab, fibrous tissue maturing, and the epithelium thickening and beginning to resemble the adjacent tissue. Tissues that regenerate extremely well are your epithelial tissues, your bone, dense, irregular, and blood-forming tissue, and tissues with moderate regenerative capacity are smooth muscle and dense, irregular connective tissue. Tissues with virtually no functional regenerative capacity are cardiac muscle and nervous tissue, a brain and spinal cord. New research shows that cell division does occur and efforts are underway to coax them to regenerate better in many times if the person has some sort of cardiac damage. Scar tissue that forms in organs, particularly in the heart, can severely impair the function of that organ. It could cause the organ to lose volume capacity, block substances, may interfere with the ability of muscles to contract, or may impair nerve transmissions. Scar adhesions may cause organs to adhere to neighboring structures, preventing normal functions, and the scarring can potentially cause progressive failure of the organ, particularly in the heart. Thanks for listening to the chapter 4. After this, you guys will have your first lecture exam due on Sunday night. You'll be using Proctorio for that. So again, please remember to download the Google extension. And I hope you guys are all doing well. Thanks for listening.